We've reached that time on a Saturday night yet again where we do the power rankings. And 28, 29 fan bases are going to argue they're too low. A couple might argue they're too high. And maybe one fan base will say, that's about right. Usually that's the team that's in first, or in this case, 31st. 31st, and how long have Detroit been 31st? This is week 3. This is 3 weeks in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 5 weeks of the last 7. They've been 31st on the board. There's no sign of Detroit. Even if they won all 3 or 4 games they play this upcoming week, I don't know that I would pull them apart in that. There aren't words. There aren't words right now. So, yeah, for Detroit, it's been a rough time, and it just keeps getting rougher. Number 30. These guys dropped 1 spot from last week, and that's New Jersey. For the Devils, it's been a rough. Let me just adjust that a little bit so you can see it says Devils underneath and all that. It's been a really tough season for the Devils, and changing coaches will help on some level. I think that was done as in part for fan service, and also in part because Ray Shero understands we've got a lot of money invested with these guys already. We need to see them turn it around. If these guys miss the playoffs and flame out spectacularly, that's going to reflect on me. So, yeah, for the Devils, there's a lot of pressure on them right now, and they're failing badly, to be honest. Number 29. These guys dropped 3 spots from last week. And when you go out on the road and you're the Kings, that's what happens. The Kings have lost 11 games in a row on the road. They don't like being on the road, but if you're a fan of a team that has the Kings coming in over the next little while, they're pretty they're pretty kind to their hosts. And tonight they actually lost to Calgary as well. And I thought if there was a game they were going to win on the road, it'd probably be in Calgary, one of those knockdown, drag-out fights between Doughty and Tkachuk, and that didn't really happen tonight. So, kind of a letdown for people who might have stayed up late waiting to have that happen. Number 28. These guys move up 2 spots from last week, and that's the Senators. The Senators continue to plug along, and they got that win in Edmonton, and they're at least, there's more reason to be optimistic than there is with these 3 with Ottawa, but that optimism does not include playoffs. So Ottawa's not going anywhere near the playoffs, but at least they're not in the bottom 3 on the power rankings this week. So small miracles, I guess, or something. Number 27, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Anaheim. And they're still having scoring issues. They're still having consistency issues. And the worst thing for Anaheim is their goaltending numbers haven't been great either. So you expect Gibson and Miller to both be fantastic, and so far the numbers have been middling for them. This is not a team that can afford to have mediocre goaltending. So for Anaheim, it's kind of everything right now. It's kind of everything that's gone wrong for them so far this year. And yet they're not completely out of this. Number 26, that being said, I have not updated the standings from last week. I go over the standings regularly, so I have not gone over the standings this week. So these are still from at least a week ago. And yet there's so little that's changed. really, in all honesty, there's very little that's changed. A lot of these are in the same spot. All right, number 26. They're back down to 26. They were 24 last week. That's Columbus. They like being 26th. They were 26 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and 4 weeks ago. And they don't get much higher than 24th where they were last week. The highest they've been this year is 19th. So for Columbus, it's... Yeah, for teams that are 26th and below, I think you're already looking at GMs wanting to figure out what they're going to do and figuring out the future. Because the first GM that makes that decision that says, all right, this season's probably at a loss, is likely going to make the best deals. So this is why you're starting to hear about Taylor Hall, and this is why I'm speculating on when Detroit's going to decide to do things and what Detroit might be able to do, what they might be able to clear up in terms of space and what the road forward might look like for Detroit. Because you need hope if you're a Detroit fan right now. The team on the ice isn't giving you a lot, so you have to look to the future. Number 25. These guys are in the same spot as last week, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. Yes, the Sabres, 1 step forward, 2 steps back for Buffalo. They lost in Calgary. They lost in Vancouver. That game in Vancouver, that was a mess for both teams. I didn't think that game did anything to help either team in terms of their standing on this board. I thought that was kind of a mess. And both coaches will be coming out of that game scratching their heads and saying, all right, we can't let that happen again. Number 24, dropping from 19 last week. Now, I understand that Toronto went in and beat St. Louis. But there were troubling signs with Toronto before that game. Now, that game may very well be a sign of things to come. Maybe they're going to turn it around again, and maybe next week they end up back in this row. But based on the other games before this one against St. Louis, I had them down as low as 25th this week, and they did move up. But again, this board is not as reactionary as it was. So I look at that one game and I go, all right, let's see if Toronto can maintain that. Let's see if this is going to be a pattern or if it's going to be a one-off. If they went into St. Louis and had that game that teams can have against a defending Stanley Cup champion, can they maintain that going forward? Their schedule is a challenge. Number 23. And same spot as last week, honestly. Chicago. Chicago had a couple of wins at the end of the week, which helped them because they'd had some challenges recently. The win over Boston, very impressive, and then they followed that up with another win the night after in New Jersey. Now we'll see this coming week whether or not they can improve on that. They have a game coming up tomorrow night. They're at home against Arizona. That'll be very telling. That's one that, in terms of this board, and when I decide, all right, these teams move up, these teams move down, that'll be a very telling game. If Chicago can win at home against a team like Arizona, that would tell me, okay, we have a pattern in Chicago, and I would likely bump them up. Number 22, down one spot from last week, is Montreal. That win over the Rangers helped them stay out of 24th or 25th or further down. And I do think Montreal's probably better than the 22nd best team in the NHL when they're playing like they should, when Carey Price is playing like he should. If Price can get his numbers back to where they should be, because every year we have this discussion with Carey Price, and it seems like every year he turns it around. So we'll see if he can do that again this year. Montreal, I have them in 22nd right now. 21st, moving up one spot from last week, is Calgary. Calgary's had a very good turnaround under the new coach. Things are looking pretty good for Calgary. That win over LA tonight. While LA is a team down here, LA is a team that's been kind of a nemesis for the Calgary Flames. So that says a lot about their state of mind, and a lot of the guys that you want to see on the scoreboard were, and I would anticipate Calgary probably moving up in coming weeks. Okay, so that being said, I now went in and edited a preview on the video instead of review, and I noticed it right away. So I fixed it right away, but for everybody who got notified, it's going to notify as preview. All right. And I blame that on the fact that I'm doing this while it's uploading. That's one of those things that I would catch while it's uploading where I go, oh, the title's wrong, and I go in and fix it. So the power rankings kind of made that happen. Number 20, same spot as last week. I didn't see anything from the Canucks to make me say, yep, they need to be bumped up, or anything to say they need to necessarily be bumped down. I want to say I see them as being a playoff team. They're in the playoffs position right now. They have that spot as a wild card. But do they hold it? I have a funny feeling that next week at this time we may be talking about Calgary being up in this area and Vancouver potentially being lower down. That being said, there's two ways to look at the Buffalo game. Either it was an ugly game all around and you can't move them up based on that, or they survived an ugly game. So there will be fans who say they survived an ugly game. I look at that and say there are some troubling trends with protecting leads I've seen with Vancouver. This didn't make me feel better about that. Number 19. Moving up from number 27 last week. So for people wondering, well, why isn't anybody moving? It's because Minnesota pushed their way up to 19th this week, and they bumped a bunch of teams down. So there are some fans who are like, we should have moved up further, and it's Minnesota's fault. So you can blame Minnesota. It's not me. The Wild have been playing very, very well. Yes, they went in and they lost tonight against Carolina 6-2. May very well be because the power rankings board's trying to give them some respect. But they had been undefeated in regulation for 10 games, and there is something to be said about that. They don't currently reside in a playoff spot, but they have been playing better hockey, I would argue, over the last 3 weeks than the teams that are behind them. And so we'll see whether or not they bounce back quickly from that loss against the Carolina Hurricanes, because the NHL schedule in December is kind of merciless. So I don't expect it to be much friendlier to Minnesota. And that's the thing. When your team has gone on one of these big, long, undefeated streaks, or undefeated in regulation in this case, it's how they react when that streak is over. Do they maintain a good record, or do they kind of fall apart and fall back into mediocrity? We'll see what Minnesota does over the next couple of weeks. Number 18, moving down one spot from last week, is the New York Rangers. Again, a lot of the teams on the board, I still feel pretty good about where they're at. The Rangers didn't really move up or down. It's just that one spot, because who was it that passed them? All right, yeah. Now that makes sense. That team passed them. So yeah, for the Rangers, they kind of maintained their spot. Just one team decided to knock them down a little bit. Number 17, also moving down one spot, is San Jose. I wanted to move San Jose up this week, but then the game in Tampa happened, and their week hasn't been fantastic. And Martin Jones, who was one of the 3 stars of the week last week, had an off week. So we end up being back in a situation where Martin Jones' save percentage, I'm going to guess after tonight, for the season is probably back down in the 889, 888 category. Somewhere in that range, maybe 890, but he was 892 coming into tonight. He allowed 4 goals on 21 shots. That tells me that save percentage came down. And for San Jose, that's a major problem. They do need to resolve that. That is something that stands out when you look at them. Number 16, dropping one spot from last week as well. Nashville. I know. There's not as much movement as there was in past power rankings, where it's just crazy and all over the place. And now it's kind of like, no, not really. Minnesota makes that huge move. Everybody else just kind of stays where they're at. Now, Nashville gets the win over New Jersey tonight. But Nashville hasn't felt like Nashville this year. They're scoring a bunch, but they're also allowing way too many goals. And allowing 4 goals against a New Jersey team that played last night, that to me is more concerning than the fact that they won the game. I think that there are still some concerns I have with the Nashville Predators. They're still sitting outside of a playoff spot, and that's an issue as well. Number 15, moving up 3 spots from last week, is Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights move up to 15th from 18th, and I think they had a very solid week. I think that they're on the verge of making that break higher up in the standings. So we've still got Arizona and Edmonton ahead of them in the division, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last. I get the feeling Vegas is going to go on a bit of a run. The best thing with this run that Vegas has had, Malcolm Subban, goaltender that hasn't really had the respect of, it feels like, of the coach or of the fan base. And now he's kind of earned that over the last couple of weeks with his play, and a nice winning streak as well. So this could work out really, really well, where maybe we see Fleury play 60% of the games, Subban play maybe 40%, and then you'd have a fresh, not overly tired Fleury for round 1 in the playoffs. And if something were to happen with Fleury, you feel okay going with Subban for a stretch. So it's only good things for that. Number 14, down 1 spot from last week, is Florida. And they could very well find themselves further down. They actually, at this point, or at some point this week, they were down to 16th. They ended up moving back up to 14th. Nice result for them tonight. Florida still finds themselves in a playoff spot. There's always that debate we can have about the strength of the Atlantic Division. And I know there's certain fan bases in the Atlantic Division that don't like to have that discussion, but it's true. The Atlantic Division, it is much easier to make the playoffs than it is in any other division in hockey right now, including the Pacific. The Pacific, I think, is proving itself to be a little bit tougher. Not a lot. Somebody crunched the numbers and shared them with me that basically the Atlantic has the 4th strongest record of the divisions. Pacific is 3rd. Central is 2nd and the Metro is 1st, I believe. I believe the Metro was number 1 and the Central was number 2. That shouldn't surprise anybody for how things look this year. The Metro looks so strong. So yeah, Florida, they're number 2. It's in the Atlantic, so they would have home ice if the playoffs started today. Number 13, moving down 1 spot from last week, is Carolina. So the Canes, again, kind of an up week, down week, a little bit in between. I did that video yesterday for Hurricane fans. And again, to me, they're kind of middle of the pack. They could find themselves falling out. But in general, they come up with enough wins that they're still in a playoff spot, and we really don't have anything to talk about there. Number 12, and dropping one spot from last week as well, Tampa. Tampa would have dropped further. Tampa did drop further. And then they beat the living, out of the San Jose Sharks. So they only dropped one spot this week. I honestly quite surprised at the play of the Tampa Bay Lightning from game to game. Sometimes you look at a game and you go, yeah, that's the Lightning. And then the next game you go, I don't know who these guys are. They wear the jerseys. They look like the Lightning, but they're not playing like the Lightning. So yeah, Tampa Bay, they dropped one spot from last week. I'm trying to figure out who rose. Oh, I know who rose. All right, I know who went up. Number 11, dropping 3 spots from last week. I understand that Dallas beat the Islanders tonight and that Dallas has put themselves in a pretty good position right now. And I think that spoke as much to the Islanders' current struggles that we've seen. The Islanders had a rough week, and that's after a rough week before that. So I had to really look at that in terms of this week's rankings. But for me, Dallas, I'm mildly concerned. Now, Radulov was first star tonight. If Radulov can keep playing like that, that will absolutely help Dallas climb back into the top 10. But for me this week, I dropped them out of the top 10. Number 10. And these guys dropped from number 6. Rough week overall for them, and that's the Oilers. Losing against the Senators will do that. That was kind of where I said, all right, there's some problems with the Oilers, and I don't know that I necessarily have them in that upper echelon right now. So they drop out of the top row. They drop from 6th to 10th. So for people who might have said, forget it, these power rankings, nobody's moving. There is some movement in the top 10 this week, and the Oilers have moved down, as has Dallas. So we'll see whether or not the Oilers rebound as soon as... I don't think they play tomorrow. I don't see them on that board. And then there's just the one other game. Oh, no, they do. They play tomorrow at home against Buffalo. So that'll be a very interesting game. We'll see if they rise up and meet the Buffalo Sabres and knock them down, or if the Sabres are able to salvage something out of this Western Canadian trip. Now, they got a point in Vancouver, so if they get 2 points in Edmonton, it's not an awful road trip through the Western Canadian provinces. Number 9, moving up 5 spots from last week. 5. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's back in the top 10. Pittsburgh had a great week. Back-to-back shutouts by Tristan Jarry. Then in that trap game against Detroit tonight, they don't lose that. And so they maintained their spot. They were 9th coming into today. They stayed 9th coming out of today. Pittsburgh, they genuinely frighten me. Malkin's playing the best hockey he has in a while. And without Crosby, without Schultz, without everybody, they are winning games. And I get the feeling that some of the guys who are playing may not be 100%. There are times with Letang where you go, is he 100%? Can Hornqvist actually be 100%? He's been beat up so often. Does Malkin suffer through injuries constantly? Like, are all of the Pittsburgh Penguins key players beat up? Is that why John Marino's scoring so many points? Because he's the only one that's healthy. He hasn't been there long enough. Either way, Pittsburgh had a really good week, and I would not want to play them in the playoffs this year. After last year's humiliation of being swept in the first round, I think Pittsburgh's going to do some damage should they make the playoffs this year, and I don't see any reason that they won't. Number 8, moving up 2 spots from last week, are the Winnipeg Jets. Jets just continue to win and play very, very well. They lost that game in overtime against Dallas, but they also came back from 2 goals down against Dallas in the third period. It was a nice gutsy performance by Winnipeg, so I didn't penalize them on that one because I thought that was a really nice road point that they earned. Connor Hellebuck continues to be quite the story in Winnipeg. He is dragging this team to the playoffs. He is one of the, I would say, there may be 3 goalies you could argue are dragging a team to the playoffs. He would definitely be one of them. You guys can debate in the comment section which ones you think are being dragged there by a goaltender. But yeah, the Winnipeg Jets, I don't think that their defense has necessarily been great. I do think that some of their offensive stars have underachieved. Blake Wheeler, for instance, and yet they're number 8 on the power rankings. If their offense were to come together, Line A goes on a run, and if their defense gets that one extra body that I think they need, and however Kevin Cheveldayoff comes up with that would be great. These guys could be the best team in the division. Number 7, dropping 5 spots from last week. 5. New York Islanders. I gave them the benefit of the doubt on that California trip, but they've had another kind of shaky week this week, and so they took a drop this week. The Islanders down to 7th, which I think is the lowest they've been since 6 weeks ago. They were 9th on the board. Then they moved up to 3rd. This is the lowest they've been since that. So I have given the Islanders praise throughout, and now there are some concerns I have. And again, they don't have that premier goal scorer. It makes it really difficult to go pillar to post all the way through the season without having some kind of setback period of time where you're struggling to win, and it feels like with the Islanders we're in that right now. So they dropped to 7th. If they have another rough week, they'll probably find themselves as low as maybe 11th or 12th if Tampa Bay really does get things going again. Number 6, moving up from number 9, and I'm sure fans are going to think I dropped this logo on the floor, and they're like, we're not that high up. Oh yeah, Philly is up to number 6. Now, they escaped the dreaded trap against the Ottawa Senators down here today. They did. And Travis Konechny being injured, if that's going to be an injury that affects the team for 3 or 4 games, that could definitely affect the results on the ice. The good news for Philadelphia is they are one of those teams that seems to have a scoring by committee. And when Konechny was fantastic at the start of the season, that kind of skewed the numbers. I don't think Konechny's been their most important player lately. I think that's either been Giroux or Couturier. So I think they're okay. I think they can do this as long as it's a short-term injury. If it's longer term, I may be more concerned. But I do not adjust my power rankings because somebody got hurt. Just think of it this way. If I did that, that means Pittsburgh would be getting penalized constantly, even though the results are really good. So there are some power rankings you will see online where a team will take a drop and it'll say, this player's injured this week, so we dropped them. Why? They haven't played a game without that player yet. Why are you dropping them? And it's part of the reason why I came up with my own power rankings the first year this channel was in its existence. There were too many times I'd look at power rankings from elsewhere and go, I don't agree. So I came up with my own. Number 5, moving up from number 7. And again, this fan base is going to be like, are we on the board at all? Arizona. Arizona's never been number 5. Never. That's never happened. They were number 1 in their division for about 24 hours. It was a glorious 24 hours. And you get the feeling that even though the Oilers took that spot back, that the Oilers may be a little bit vulnerable, and Arizona could very well end up taking that spot. The Coyotes are a scary team if you're playing against them, and if your defense is at all shaky, or if you get frustrated with Kemper, like they will feast. And yet the results, I don't know, they were kind of middling this week, but I felt were still better than the Islanders, and I still think they outperformed the Oilers on the whole this week. Number 4, same spot as last week. And honestly, I debated about dropping St. Louis. So here's the thought process I had behind keeping St. Louis where they are. They lost 5-2 to Toronto tonight. But they haven't had a stinker like this all year. Not really. And Binnington, this is the first time in his career he's been pulled. So, again, I'm not going to say this is a pattern. And I couldn't drop them below Arizona and Philadelphia, which is what I would have done with my reactionary power rankings I used to do. So St. Louis stays in 4th this week, but they've got to bounce back from that Toronto loss, or they'll find themselves dropping down pretty quick, because that was embarrassing. 4-1 in the first period, and a couple of those goals were ones that Binnington normally saves. So we'll just say it was an off night for their starting goalie, off night for the Blues in general, and we'll see if that continues to be a trend. It's not a trend yet. Are we going to get to a trend? Number 3, same spot as they were last week, and that's Boston. So the Boston Bruins, who had moved up to 2nd spot, they had. I was like, all right, because there have been Bruins fans that for weeks have been saying you really need to have the Bruins in 1st. The Bruins should be in 1st. And yet, I kept watching Bruins games where they weren't playing a full 60 minutes. And then I'd watch a Capitals game and go, these guys are playing a full 60 minutes. So I couldn't justify having Boston ahead of Washington. And this week I thought, if Washington has any kind of a foible, you may see Boston at first. But Boston's the team that has had its struggles. So they stay the same spot as they were last Saturday, but they've actually dropped today on the board. Because number 2, moving up from number 5 last week, don't look now, it's the Colorado Avalanche. Yeah. The Avs are back. And you get the feeling, I know Makar's out, and this is the thing. I understand Makar's out. Grubauer left the game hurt again. But we don't know what their status is. I can't drop them down when they just went in and beat Boston in Boston 4-1. They put the first regulation defeat on the Boston Bruins of the season tonight. And they made it look pretty easy, to be honest. Francouz really wasn't tested after he went in the net until the next period. And Boston just didn't have an answer for what Colorado was providing. So, to me, Colorado belongs here now. And I do believe they're the best team in the division, and I'd be very surprised if they don't end up making a pass by the St. Louis Blues. But, again, I don't count the Blues out. I have Colorado up at number 2 because what a week for them. They've done quite well for themselves, which means that number 1, this is how many weeks in a row? It's actually only 2 weeks in a row. But it's 3 out of 5, and that's the Capitals. So the Caps, pretty decent week for them, I would say. You go through California and you win all 3. That's a pretty decent week. And we'll see how they go from here. But to me, the Capitals are playing the best hockey in the NHL. They have the depth. They don't need Ovechkin to score, but Ovechkin has 20, so that's nice. They don't need Karlsson to score more points than every other defenseman, but he's doing that, so that's nice. They don't need Braden Holtby to have 15 wins already, but he does, and that's kind of nice as well. And they don't even need Samsonov to necessarily be all that strong when he goes in, but he is, and that's nice too if you're a Caps fan. So everything's kind of rosy if you're the Capitals. And in terms of injuries to big-name guys, they are without Backstrom. They've been without Backstrom for a while. But it really hasn't negatively impacted the team as of yet. And so, with Eller playing a bigger role, with Kuznetsov being given an opportunity to shine, these guys are all doing very, very well for themselves. And guys like Leipzig and Dowd have just fit right in, and they're doing really, really well this year. And it is strange to see in Dowd and Leipzig especially, guys who were cast off by the Canucks, and now they're on the best team in the league, and they're performing really, really well. So it says a lot about how smart the general manager is, how well the coach is doing, and Todd Reirden does not get enough credit for how good the Capitals are. We talk a lot about Barry Trotz with the Islanders. We need to start giving Todd Reirden some consideration as well when we start talking about who should be the coach of the year. If the Capitals finish first overall, I would hope Reirden would get some votes. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I do really like at the end of the week, when I get to the power rankings board, things now are kind of steady. Some teams will move when it's warranted and when they have a really good run going, like Pittsburgh, Colorado, Minnesota. But in general, the rest of the teams are kind of set for the most part. And it takes something kind of a dramatic loss or dramatic movement for me to say, okay, this team gets bumped up or bumped down. But thank you guys so much for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. That's the end of my Saturday night. I will talk to you again soon.